Hello everyone, I'm very glad to be here for the second session of the Banking Risk and Regulatory Academy. I'm Frédéric Bujoc, I'm partner in the risk regulatory practice in France. I will facilitate this session with Igor Toder, director in this practice. Perhaps before going through the agenda of these sessions, a quick overview on the program of the week, as you see, which is very complete. So tomorrow will be more focused on credit risk management, which is, as you know, a hot topic for banks in this post-COVID, I will say, environment, and especially the non-performing loan management. So you will have a session dedicated to this NPL tomorrow afternoon. On Wednesday, so on the 16th of June, you will have more, I will say, sessions around the BIRD framework in the morning, and in the afternoon you will see how we can use the cloud in the banking environment. On Thursday morning you will have a session dedicated to ESG, which is also a topic for financial institutions. The afternoon will be focused on cyber and IT security. And lastly, on Friday, so the last day, you will have more sessions dedicated to compliance and financial security topics on Friday. So that was for this very quick overview of the week. I propose to move on this session on capital management and stress testing. Next slide, please. Next, yes. Thank you. So for these sessions, we propose to articulate this session in 3 steps. Firstly, we propose to make a quick reminder of what are the ICAAP objectives and regulatory expectations in these regards. In a second part, as you know, who don't know, ECB has performed several, I will say, inspections on ICAAP processes. So it was in FY19, if I remember well, but they issue a very comprehensive report based on these inspections, which allows to have a sort of, I would say, maturity models or maturity models of ICAAP framework of different banking institutions, but also what are their latest expectations in this regards. So we think it was interesting to present you the key takeaways of this report in these sessions. And finally, we will provide you with some insights on stress testing and reverse stress testing trends in this post-COVID environment. So the idea is to see how banking institutions have or will take into account the lesson learned by the crisis, but also the latest expectations of the regulators in these regards, which will make the link with the second presentations. So this presentation will last about, I will say, 40 minutes, and the last 20 minutes of the sessions will be dedicated to the questions, so sort of Q&A sessions, and we'll try to answer your questions you may have. Next slide, please. So just before leaving the floor to Igor, I just want to remind you some of the rules if you have not assisted to the presentation this morning or the presentations during the first session of this Banking Academy, Risk and Regulatory Academy, sorry, last year. So the first rule, you are mute by default. So if you want to communicate with us, you have to use the chat. That's the first rule. And I will say that the same process will apply for the questions. That means you can type or ask your questions using this chat box, and we will answer, sorry, the question, yes, at the end of the session. So after these 40 minutes presentations, that was the rules I want to remind. Igor, I leave you the floors for this first part. Next slide, please, and Igor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Frédéric. I will just open my webcam. Yes. So that people can see me. Yes. Right. So hello everyone. So let's get started with the ICAAP. So with Frédéric, we wanted to do something where we go back to the basics and will not go too much in this due to the variety of the audience today. So there are people who may be less advanced, some who may be very advanced. So I hope we'll find what you're looking for. So we'll try just to go back to the basics of the ICAAP. So the ICAAP, I mean, if as the objective of the ICAAP, and should not be misunderstood, is really that something we describe as a key part of your strategic business plan. When you work for a corporate, except for in the banking world, you run I would say at least on a yearly basis your business plan, where you have your P&L and when you have your assets and liabilities. When you are running a bank, you still have to do this kind of exercise, but it is framed by an additional constraint, which is the regulatory constraint, and which is the ICAAP. So on top of your assets, liabilities, and revenues, you need also to project and to take into account your risk. Of course, you have, and I'm sure you all know that you have in the Basel framework 3 pillars: the first pillar, the second pillar, and the third pillar. The first pillar is, if I made a comparison with the sartorial world, we could say it as an off the rack or ready to wear. The second pillar is something which is more made to measure or bespoke, and the third pillar are the disclosure. Will not tackle that. So, you know, we hear a lot of wording about ICAAP. We discussed about economic view and computation and risk, but just bear in mind that this is something that is absolutely mandatory, and this is the key component of your business plan, in which you address your own risk and try to demonstrate to the supervisors, but also internally, that what you are planning to do is sustainable, namely that the risk you will undertake are in line or in accordance with what you're planning to do in terms of revenue or asset growth. And this is something customary in the banking world and in the banking environment. And this whole package that you also might have to delineate with how you run on the day-to-day the business, which is the risk appetite framework, how you recover if you're in a bad situation, which is the recovery plan. All that forms a unique package that is now put under the scrutiny of your supervisor, be it a national supervisor or be it the ECB, where really you try to demonstrate that what you plan to do is sustainable and that you have calibrated your risk in an appropriate way. And this is the basis of a discussion, of a dialogue with the ECB or your national supervisor. They may agree or they may disagree with the way you assess your risk, but at the end, if they agree or disagree, you will come up with what is called your own risk, which is what is called the Pillar 2, and this is the new capital requirement, which goes on top of the Pillar 1. And this Pillar 1 plus Pillar 2 becomes your minimum regulatory capital. This means that if you ever fall below this minimum regulatory capital, you are in a breach and you may not pursue your activity if you can't recover. So again, even if it's framed by voluminous literature, ICAAP is nothing more than the view of your risk to demonstrate or to underpin that your business plan is sustainable and that you have reassessed your risk with regard to the business plan. This is something that is absolutely customary and absolutely mandatory to understand before we go any further. So now that we have discussed about this objective of the broad objective of the ICAAP, maybe we can go a little bit more in detail. So maybe can we go to the next slide, please? I don't have the hand on that. Yes. So on this slide, we say that the ICAAP is a value-added exercise. In many instances, at least many of our clients do not see it that way. They think it's really a regulatory exercise with a little added value because it is more and more framed by constraints put by the supervisors. The supervisors did put these constraints because the ICAAP exercise in the past was, I wouldn't say overlooked, but not taken as seriously as it should have. However, it is a key exercise because, again, this is your view of your risk to support your business plan. So that's why we divided that into 6 topics. So namely, when you run a business plan at a 3-year horizon, of course, you have projected your revenues, we say that, your assets, and in the banking environment, you have projected the risk. The question is, did you sufficiently calibrate, measure the risk and how it fits with your minimum risk measures, which are pillar 1. The pillar 1 is the minimum, as we say. This is the off the rack or the off the rack suit. You can't live in an off the rack suit. You need to do something more internal. That's what is the eye of the ICAAP. And to do that, you need to move from pillar 1 to pillar 2, and then you have to reassess your risk. So that's why the first part is the ICAAP should be aligned with your risk profile and strategy. So you can't have something, again, which is off the rack. It should be really aligned with your risk profile and strategy. This is why when you're drafting an ICAAP, you need to first assess your risk profile, your strategy, so namely your business plan. Then, of course, it is really at the heart, it lies at the heart of your risk management strategy, because the ICAAP will define at the end. You will have to reassess all your risks, to remeasure all the risk, to see which risks are already captured in the pillar 1 or not captured, whether those risks are important or of a lesser importance. Again, we take risk to generate revenues. Never forget that. So you have to reassess your risk, reassess whether the pillar 1 captures them sufficiently or not sufficiently. And if not sufficient, maybe you should reassess them, so remeasure it. And if there are some risks which you deem are key to follow your strategy, you will have to address these new risks which are not captured by the pillar 1 or insufficiently captured by the pillar 1. Of course, as you try at the end to demonstrate that you have done your exercise properly, you have to document, but this is not to mention it, but we mention it anyhow. You have to document because at the end, it is your own supervisor who will see whether you have done the exercise properly and whether the figures in terms of pillar 2, again, the pillar 2 will be what is called the add-on, which goes on top of your minimum regulatory requirement, which is 8% in total. And then you will come up with a mandatory add-on, which could be 0, or which could go up to 3.5%, 4% in some instances. And now for the banks which are directly supervised by the ECB, the amount of pillar 2 has been disclosed since 2019. So again, it is a key now information. Before it was a private information, now it's a key information which is disclosed to the financial market and to the financial analyst. So this is why it's important to have it. Then once said that, you have aligned your revenues, your asset growth, liability growth, of course, your risk, and then how do you on a day-to-day basis operate? This is the delineation with the risk appetite. So there is a link also with the ICAAP and your risk appetite. Of course, you have this objective of business, you have this risk objective, but how do you ensure that you will meet the risk that you are running? And this is how you delineate with the risk appetite, where from a risk objective and a revenue, you will delineate to a very granular level to all your businesses. How much risk can I take on the market, on the equity, on the FIC? How much risk can I take on the loan business? How much risk can I take on the lease business? This is what you're supposed to do. 5th point, yes, of course, it should be driven at the highest level of the bank. That's why you have to have a governance which is put in place to ensure that you're on a very regular basis. You have a feedback loop. Namely, you have set up your ICAAP, you have decided, and hopefully their supervisor did agree with the level of Pillar 2, and then you have to stick to what you've done, and to ensure that the limits that you have put to respect the revenue, and to fulfill with the risk you have to undertaken, everything is aligned. So that's why you have to put the governance at the highest level of the bank. And then, well, that's what we've said from the beginning. This is not just a simple regulatory exercise which should be devoted either to risk or to finance. That's everyone in the bank driving the business should be involved. So it's the CEO, of course, the exco, of course, but also the business managers, so namely the people who are running each of the businesses, finance and risk. So, and this is, we'll see that a little bit later on, one of the reproaches, or I would say point that could be ameliorate, which has been pinpointed by the ECB. The business is not sufficiently involved in the ICAAP. So maybe we can go to the next slide, please. Yes. So here we'll just go very quickly on that. We have, as we said, the governance, the risk management, the business management. So an ICAAP is credible to anyone if it's really enshrined or delineated into your day-to-day management. So it should be produced on a regular basis, depending on the size, of course, and of the complexity of your institution. A very small institution do update what we've seen their ICAAP on an annual basis. You can't do it less frequently than an annual basis. It's always supported, monitored, and validated by the governing bodies, of course, by the management. And it should be, and it has to be reviewed independently, usually by the general inspection, what you call it in France, or the third line of defense, which would be the internal audit. The internal audit, this is a word, something important, is when they are reviewing an ICAAP, the role of the internal audit is a little bit, I would say, difficult, because they are here to assess whether what the governance, the computation, the risk assessment, the methodology are credible. But if you critique, if the critique is too strong, it's easy to say, well, that's not sufficient, you should put more risk. But when you are doing that, even at the third line of defense, the risk you are running that would bear on you or fall upon you is that you will be tempted to ask for more add-ons, so more pillar 1, so more pillar 2, which is not always in the favor of the institution you're working for. So your role, if you have people here from the third line of defense, is a little bit difficult, because you need to assess the credibility and to be clear that you believe in the ICAAP, but also to say to put in line the points in which you do not believe that much, and if you don't believe at the third line of defense, perhaps the supervisory bodies will not believe as well. But you should not be also too harsh to say, well, that's good, but you should improve or put more risk, because if you put more risk, it may require more capital, so you're not playing in favor of your own employer. So here your role is difficult, because you should be independent, but also support your institution. The risk management, of course, is important, because all the risks that you have identified into your ICAAP, so the key, the material risk, you should find them into your risk appetite. The risk appetite is nothing more than the level of risk that, at a very granular level, you are willing to bear. And when you aggregate this granular level, you should come up with the total risk envelope, which should fit, or which should be aligned to what you find in the ICAAP. Then, of course, you have the stress testing part, but we'll talk of that in a minute, because your ICAAP, again, your add-on is assessed as of today, And then you have to demonstrate that when you stress your business plan, so maybe you have more risk or unexpected or losses, that you never ever go below your minimum regulatory capital, which is composed of a pillar 1 plus the pillar 2 stemming from the ICAAP. And this is something really key that you have to demonstrate to your supervisory bodies. And business management, we already said that it should be a key part of the business planning. It should be allocated by business line. Again, allocation is not synonymous of very complex equations. That could be also something simple, but it should always make sense with what you are doing. Right, maybe we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here we just illustrate how you come from pillar 1 to pillar 2. On the left-hand side, that's easy, that's all everybody knows here. Pillar 1, you have the own funds, of course, CET1, T1, and T2. You have the RWA, which are mandatory under pillar 1. I will not go into that. And then you have your 3 ratios, plus the 4th one, we did not put that in, which is also the leverage ratio, because it's also a capital ratio, which should also be taken into account into your ICAAP. And then you have the pillar 2. Pillar 2, as we said, are 2 things. Let's just make a small focus on the RWAs. The RWAs on credit, market, and operational risk, you have 2 questions. Whether are the measurement in pillar 1 sufficient, or shall I reassess the measurement? It may happen that the pillar 1 insufficiently captures some of the risk, which are with the methodologies, maybe not that much of a stress, maybe neglecting some concentrations. Here you're free to reassess, but at least you have to pose the question whether it is sufficiently assessed and to remeasure. And then you have a bunch of new risk which that you may be willing to consider. Of course, you have your own taxonomy. This is something which is absolutely mandatory. So I'm sure that all the audience running a bank has a taxonomy where all your risks are designated or identified at a very granular level. We have different taxonomy models which do exist. The 2 most popular we have heard of are BRAP or LCSA. And of course, you need to use this kind of taxonomy to assess whether you have some risks which are not taken in pillar 1, but that you deem are important or underpin the sustainability of your business plan. If it is the case, you need to identify this risk, and then, if you are in a capacity to do it, to measure those risks. So we just illustrate some kind of risk, concentration, sovereign, business. Today, ECB has it that the 2 key risks which are not in this list would be the climate risk, and will be also the cyber risk. Cyber is encapsulated today in operational risk, but if you assume that in your business plan you plan to expand your let's say your retail business by strong digitalization of your client experience, let's assume that you have that into your business plan, and to do that you will need to build IT capacities to digitalize and to have a better client experience. That's the first point. But if you forget that when doing that, you may run additional cyber risk, well, that will be pinpointed by the supervisor, who will tell you, that's fine. Hey, we do understand what you are willing to do in your business plan, but didn't you forget that you have a dormant risk today, which is the cyber risk, that will increase massively if you digitalize, if you give access to IT platforms, to iPhone platforms. So you should at least demonstrate that you have thought of that. Maybe you're not in a capacity to measure it properly, but at least you have assessed it. You have understood what you're doing. And again, this is a little bit more tricky part, is about the own funds. Well, CET1, there is no discussion about it. T1 and T2, you may, I mean, usually it's seen for advanced institutions where they discuss whether T1 and T2, of course, are part of your own funds, but will they be always available if things go wrong? This is a question that some advanced institutions think of, and some of them do not consider all T1 or all T2 when computing their own capital ratios. So it's more conservative, but this is also part of your ICAAP exercise. Let's go maybe to the next slide. Okay. Then, this is something we have many questions from our clients. So you have your Pillar 1 risk. You have made the previous exercise by reassessing all your risks, disregarding the risks that you deem are not that material, and focusing on the risks that do drive your revenues, your asset growth, and your business plan. Remeasure this risk. Decide whether this new measurement comes up today or ends up today with an add-on. So namely that you are now convinced, and you try to convince the supervisory bodies that it's not 8% of total capital ratio that is adapted, but it is maybe 8.5, 9%. That's as of today. That's the end of the step 1. Then you have the step 2 and step 3. So now you have your new minimum capital requirement, which is again, let's say 9%. Is my business plan under the normal conditions sustainable with this 9%? So you do project your revenues, you do project your asset and your assets, you do project your RWAs stemming from this asset, but also you add the operational risk, and you compute all your ratios. If you have T1 and T2, you need to compute your 3 ratios, and also the leverage ratio. And then you say, okay, is my business plan sustainable? Yes or no? Why 3 years? Because it's a requirement. We have had numerous questions from clients who think they're not able, for many reasons, to provide with a 3-year business plan. It is something customary, and we'll see that in a minute, that it becomes also the norm. It still happens that less advanced clients, or clients which have no visibility, that's, for instance, in the current Brexit or post-Brexit mode, we have clients who are now settling into France and claim that, well, they have a vision at 2 years time, but not 3 years. So that may be exceptional conditions that you have to document. But basically, you should stick to the business plan and your risk with a time horizon of 3 years. Then you have to stress your business plan. So you have to apply severe but plausible stress. Stress could apply to the revenues. Maybe you will have some losses that you haven't taken in the baseline conditions, but also to your risk. We discussed about cyber risk, which could grow significantly because you think that in 2 years' time, the digitalization project would be finished. But also, you may also think that if you have a digitalization project which fails, you will not be able to expand your franchise and your client base, and then your revenues, and the growth and your natural growth of your equity will not be is too optimistic. So that's also a stress. You fail a digitalization project, so you will have less revenues and less capital growth. This is also something you need to consider under the adverse condition. And again, the goal is to identify the weaknesses of your business plan, and to demonstrate that even if these weaknesses turn out to be true, you will still be able to, your business plan is still sustainable, namely that you will respect your Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, even the stress condition and your leverage ratio. So this is something really important, this stress part. Never neglect it, because it gives a lot of information on the sustainability of your business plan, and this is really a key point of focus for your respective supervisory bodies. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right. So now we have exposed what is expected, what you have seen, our experience with regard to the ICAAP. Now let's see what the ECB thinks of that. As Frederick pointed out, ECBs on a regular basis, I would say every 2 years, conducts a kind of survey on the banks which are directly under its supervision. And the latest report was dated from August 2020, pinpointed 7 plus 1 areas of improvement. Okay, I will not go areas by areas, but just give a little summary of that. First one, senior management, business are not sufficiently involved. It remains to a large extent finance and a risk and a documentary exercise. This is not what the ICAAP in its spirit should be. Second point, if it's a risk and a finance kind of reporting exercise, it can't be integrated into the day-to-day business. This is also something ECB complains about. Then the vision between the Pillar 1 risk, whether they are sufficiently covered or measured, this kind of interaction between your own view of the risk and the Pillar 1 view of the risk is still an area of improvement. The future risk, and we discussed about that, what we can call dormant risk as well, like climate, like cyber. Again, even if you cannot quantify them, you need at least to pinpoint them, to demonstrate, to document that you have thought that these kind of risks, even if they are dormant, you still try or endeavor to take or to integrate them into your ICAAP. Well, definition of available internal capital, well, I will skip that. That may be a very technical point. Quantification, yes, because you have to try to quantify the unknowns, or to at least to identify if we run models where the risks are. This is an area of improvement. And the stress testing, it's still not sufficiently implemented. However, the stress testing part is key because it will assess and try, and we need to figure out whether you can sustain your business plan under dire stress conditions. And I said 7 plus 1. Why? Because all what underpins a proper or an appropriate ICAAP is the data quality. Quality and availability and data collection without too much manual operations, and which means without too much cost. And this is something which is, I would say, and to the ECB states, the strongest point of improvement. Data is still not there. That's why ICAAP, people who are in charge of running the ICAAP are not sufficiently nimble because they don't have the data. So that's why it remains an exercise which is not seamless. Okay, that's fine. Let's go now to let's make the last focus before we enter into the Q&A. Let's make a last focus now on the stress testing part. May we go to the next slide, please? Yes. So we'll discuss about stress testing, but also reverse stress testing, which puts some people under stress because it's very difficult to tackle this kind of reverse stress testing, and we'll discuss that in a minute. Stress testing, it's mandatory. You need to have a stress test exercise. 3 years now, it's mandatory as well, but it's now the norm. mean, some years ago, we had many clients who were not able or not willing to run the stress test over 3 years. Now it becomes the norm for the ECB. That's what they've seen, and the less sophisticated clients, which are a little bit lagging behind, try or endeavor to comply with this requirement of 3 years, unless they can argue for the argument of proportionality, that they're not capable to do it and have the good reasons not to do it, which would encourage to go to this 3-year exercise. And again, if you want to run a 3-year stress testing exercise, you need to have good data quality and a good IT systems. COVID-19. As you've seen, the EBA postponed the stress test exercise from 2020 to 2021. But in the meantime, ECB, but also national supervisors have asked in the middle of the pandemic to many institutions, not mentioned to all institutions, to revamp or to review their business plans in a pre-pandemic mode. So just in the middle of the year, we have clients who did that, and their business plan at 3-year horizon had to be revamped and to see what will be the impact of the pandemic in terms of asset growth, of risk growth, and revenue growth. This was a challenge again because most of institutions are not nimble enough. They can't operate in an agile mode to revamp their business plan and see how the ICAAP fits into this new business plan. Third point, I'm sure you're all aware of, is the climate risk. In the current stress testing exercise, which is currently underway, the EBA does not include the climate risk. But in parallel, the EBA has conducted an exercise, which is a self-voluntary exercise. I think 29 institutions did positively answer to identify their climate risk component within their activities. We make a small parallel with the Bank of England. Some days ago, I think it was last week, the Bank of England launched the first what they call climate biennial explanatory scenarios, where they will ask a few large institutions directly under the PRA/Bank of England supervision to see how the portfolios would react with the 3 climate scenarios provided by the NGFS, which is one of the most prominent climate scenario generators. And it will not lead to any add-on. That's something which has been disclosed and clearly disclosed by the Bank of England to encourage institutions to participate and not be reluctant. Because if you think that if you do the exercise openly and you end up with an additional capital requirement as of today, banks will less be prominent to participate. So Bank of England launched this exercise so that institutions get prepared to analyze how climate changes would affect, the first part is the physical risk, and how physical risk would affect their counterparties, usually the loan counterparties, and their creditworthiness. The exercise is still ongoing and is still underway, and we'll see how it will develop by the end of the year, and the binding measure, as are expected, mid to 2022. Right, now we go to the next slide. Okay, now we go to the reverse stress test. So for those who are familiar with the recovery plan, reverse stress testing is something where you try to assess what is called the point of non-viability of your business, and usually you have to add up numerous layers of risk in order to attain or to this target of non-viability point. So here we have just stated what BCBS, EBA, and ECB are expecting. So it's not a stress test, it's a reverse stress test. you say, I want to go bankrupt, or at least I want to go to a point of non-viability, which is not linked necessarily to falling below regulatory ratio, even though you end up falling under this regulatory ratio of 8% that we have discussed. But you have to make this exercise openly and try to assess what is your point of non-viability. Usually it's above this minimum ratio. Some institutions consider that it is below, but they will stick to the mandatory Pillar 1 ratio, and try to see which risk, if they combine in a very bad way or unlucky way, how you will reach this point of non-viability. Let's go now to the last slide. This is the next one, where we finish that. Yeah, please. Yeah. No. Okay. That's okay. Let's go to the next one. 3 minutes left. Yes. So here, yeah, the first point is, what is the point of non-viability? 2/3 of the bank, and this is that the ECB pointed out, do not, they just go the easy way. They say the point of non-viability is where I go below Pillar 1 plus Pillar 2, right? Some of them do something more refined. Usually it's complex institution, and they try to say, well, it's this point of non-viability, we believe that it is lower than the Pillar 1 threshold. Of course, we'll stick to the Pillar 1 threshold, but we believe that if we had the choice, we think that it should not be 8%. It could be 6, it could be 7. Why? Because we believe that even under 8%, the market players would not have would not believe that that we have reached this point of non-viability. We think it's lower if we have to have a very deteriorated capital ratio. And also the definition of the point of non-viability is, if you reach this point, it's just like when you're flying in a plane. At some point, you have such a low speed that you can do whatever you want. You will crash. And this is what we translate into the point of non-viability. The management actions have no effect. So this is more a qualitative way of thinking, but it should be part of the reflection that you may run. You have to do the same on the ICAAP, but that's not the subject of today. And then once you have defined this point of non-viability, then how you will reach it. Usually, you need at least to take the risk which are already into your ICAAP. Do not take risks that you have deemed as being dormant or outside the ICAAP. That would be contradictory. To reach this kind of non-viability point, you need to combine, as we say, some risky scenarios. And then you should contemplate a situation which is extreme but plausible to reach this point. And of course, you also need to assess the consistency of the PNV with what you have put into your recovery plan. This is something the supervisory body look at and try to see whether you have respected that. Some institutions do consider that the threshold of non-viability is the same for, align the threshold with the recovery plan and the ICAAP. So I think we are there. We have 15 minutes left. We're right on time. So please ask your questions if you have questions. I think it's through the chat, and we'll be happy to provide you with some answers.
So I see that we have no questions so far. So do not hesitate if you have some questions to ask. We'll try to answer. So perhaps waiting for the question, just want to come back on what Igor said on COVID-19 impact and the fact that the financial institutions have to revisit their business plans toward, I would say, the pandemic situations. So it's not only the business case; it's also the stress scenario. As Igor mentioned, regulators expect severe but plausible stress scenarios, and based on the situation and the impact of the COVID-19, banks and financial institutions have to revisit this stress scenario towards what we have experienced with COVID-19. So it was also a business plan, but also the stress testing. So I think we have a first question, Igor. So what are the biggest challenge of the EBA stress test, and what is the anticipated outcome? So I think it's the exercise of this year. So the expected or the anticipated outcome, it's difficult to forecast. Perhaps in terms of biggest challenge, what we have seen, I will let Igor complete, but I think it's completely what we have said regarding the framework or the data issues regarding stress testings. That means that we have seen that several institutions, I would say, or a lot of institutions, have not invested a lot in stress testing. As Igor mentioned, they have not included stress testing, or they have included very recently in the ICAAP. And I would say it's the same for EBA stress tests. That means that they have difficulties to produce and to retrieve the data, to define or to implement the scenarios given by the ECB. And we see that most of the banks experience difficulties, or we say it's very tough, because they have to retrieve. There's a lot of manual treatments in order to produce this data. And we can think that this process should be very automated or very agile, and it is not the case so far. So that means that, to me, the biggest challenge are still operational and the way to produce the figures. Even so, it's now perhaps yes many years that they have to do this exercise. But I think that the investment have not been sufficient in order to perform the exercise in a smooth way.
Yes, right.
I don't know, Igor, if you want to complete.
No, that's fine. Yes, this year we have avoided to include the climate risk, which is good for many institutions. Yeah, but that's right. The difficulty will be just to operate in a nimble way and to focus on the effects of the post effects of the COVID. So what do we have here? How often should a bank run stress testing on ICAAP? Well, that would be at least once a year. If you are a non-complex institution, it can't be less than once a year. Usually it's more. The most advanced banks would run it on a quarterly basis to follow up their activities. The less complex banks, we have a bunch of complete range of clients. Some do it on a quarterly basis, and the less complex do it on a yearly basis.
Yes, and to complete what just what Igor said, there are two things. First one is to I would say update the result of the stress test. So that means that you can keep the same stress scenario and update the results. And as you mentioned, it can be at least once a year, but most or more advanced banks are doing it on a quarterly or semi-annually basis. The other thing and the trend is to update the stress scenario on a not perhaps quarterly basis, but at least on a semi-annual basis. And this trend is clearly linked to COVID. That means that during the COVID or post-COVID, institutions have to revisit, I would say, the stress scenario. And I say that this trend will continue, and so that means that they will do it on a more regular basis. and more often at once a year.
Okay. I'm not sure to understand. Like you have to put your mask on.
Yeah. Sorry.
What is the overall stress scenario? If I try to understand questions correctly, it means that you will have to reconsider in your ICAAP all the risks, and either when we say stress, you think that you're not obliged to stress all of the risk which you have into your ICAAP. So let's assume that you have already stressed your credit risk or remeasured your credit risk with an add-on, that you have remeasured your operational risk with an add-on, and you have something more granular, or your market risk. You may think that what could go really wrong, and you may deem that, again, it's something which is really personal, that you have a strong weakness or something could really go wrong into the market risk, or that so here you will just put the emphasis on and stress the part of your market risk, maybe more volatility, maybe more some losses, maybe some issue with the model, and remain stable or not stress the other kind of risk, namely credit, because you think that everything should be fine, or operational risk. So it's very difficult to give an example. It's just the methodology that you need to apply, is just to reconsider and to choose among all the risks that you have assessed into your Pillar 2 what could go wrong. And it could be either something that will affect your RWAs, but also your revenues. So that's maybe you may think that you will have, I don't know, you will be fined for loss of data. Let's imagine that you think that you're a little bit weak into your cybersecurity, that you cannot protect as you should your client data, and if you have a breach in cybersecurity, you will be fined, or maybe you will lose part of your franchise or of your clients. Let's assume if you're a private bank, if you lose some of personal client data, your reputation will be hit, and you will lose clients, and then you will have a very strong drop into your revenues. You can contemplate anything as long as it makes sense and is adapted to the business you're running. Okay.
Basel 4.
Are you seeing Basel 4 starting to be disclosed in the ICAAP?
Not so.
Maybe you can. Okay, we'll leave you. I did not personally. I don't know, Frederic.
No, same answer. I did not see any financial institution disclosing Basel 4 impact so far, but not talking about Basel 4, but CRR2. Typically, at the end of December last year, clearly yes, the impact of CRR2, but it was much more, I would say, much more sooner, were disclosed in the capital planning and in the ICAAP of end of December last year. So, but so far Basel 4, no.
Okay. COVID-19. Okay. How can the COVID-19 situation be covered in the stress testing scenarios? Is the coverage of a similar scenario expected by the supervisory authority? Well, what we've seen in the COVID-19 is, first, before the stress scenario, you could already embed it into your business plan with something which would be less optimistic, and then yeah, mostly that's what we see. It's not that we haven't seen exactly a stress on the COVID because COVID is already there. And if you're running credit portfolio, perhaps you could contemplate of revamping or restressing your upcoming losses with regard to your credit portfolio, because so far that seems to be good. Of course, if you just backtest and if you have any subsidy like we have in France from the government, you won't see any specific additional losses now, but you may, as a stress scenario, contemplate that in 2 years' time, when the governmental subsidies will stop, you may have some unanticipated losses with regard to a strong creditworthiness deterioration, some population of obligors. So that's the way I would consider it. Maybe Frédéric, I don't know whether you have any.
No, completely agree. I just was looking to another questions, which are the most common approaches to quantificate strategic risk within ICAAP. I have not seen for the institution I know strategic risk quantified within the ICAAP. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know, Igor, you have seen something around strategic risk?
Yes. Strategic risk, again, you need to define what is strategic risk. I discussed perhaps maybe too rapidly this point. If you are now undertaking, let's say, a digitalization project to have more to expand your client base or to have a better client experience, you may deem that it is a strategic project, and you have already linked into your business plan the success of this project to additional revenues, or you may have also less cost. So you may deem that if this project fails, you need to either modify your business plan, so the revenues that you have anticipated, and say, if this project fails, we've done that once for a client, we will have less revenues, or the cost base will increase. So that's a way to quantify strategic risk. You will not impact your RWAs, you will impact your revenues, but if you impact your revenue growth, of course, you will impact your forecast ratios. So that's a way you would do it. You want to take the next one, and we need to stop in 1 minute.
Just
because we have lots of questions, but okay, I think, sorry, but we need to stop. Frédéric, I leave you take maybe the last
perhaps,
or the penultimate questions.
Yes, perhaps on how should institution assess whether the internal defense stresses are adequate enough in order to meet the expectation of the supervisory authorities. No, there is no benchmark. It's a little bit judgmental because it's severe but plausible, so that's very difficult to interpret. What I can say that regulator, especially after COVID-19, consider that the stress scenario which were applied by the institution were not very enough severe, and so they often they require to apply more severe scenarios. But the regulatory definition is very vague or interpretable, as I said, severe but plausible, and I say we have not further guidance in this regard. Very difficult to interpret.
And last answer. It's the one discussing with the climate. I would just encourage you to go to the site of the PRA and the Bank of England, where you will see how the climate risk, we are on the really first step on that, and how the PRA is now contemplating to set the foundations for the climate risk. But do not go too fast on that. Just try to see what's going on, and I would just encourage you to go on the Bank of England site where they have described parts of the methodology. I think we are running out of time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the sessions. We are very glad to facilitate this session with Igor. Thank you for the questions. A lot of questions. Sorry not to be able to answer all the questions. And have a nice day, and bye bye.
Yeah, goodbye.
Bye bye.